Sheet metal training, step 6.2, labor options. With the labor overview training, you were shown that the program is set up currently out of the box to have labor per item. This is a per piece labor factor. All of the components are set up per piece and all of the items are set up per piece. One of the most common questions is how to switch the system over to estimate on a per pounds per hour method. And to do that, you must take several steps. Let's begin. We will go back to the setup menu and we will first start in one of the pressure files. We're going to go ahead and select this 2-inch pressure file, and I'm going to copy it and give it a custom name so that we can leave the integrity of the other pressure files alone. I'm going to click on the 2-inch pressure file, go down to the bottom and hit copy, and I'm going to give it a custom name. I'm going to type in 2-inch pounds per hour galvanized. When I click the OK button, it'll then create the pressure file. The first step we must take inside this pressure file is to go to the general options and check the boxes of what labor factors we want to be pounds per hour. I want to do the fabrication labor and the install hours as well as the other labor hours. Now I can go back and hit menu, and we could look at each of the individual items and talk about what adjustments need to be made. The labor factors that are in here now are completely invalid. If we were to use this number, we're telling it that we're going to install 0.23 pounds per hour. You're going to get a lot of labor estimating that way. The typical way that people set the system up is that they will have one common fabrication pounds per hour and one common installation pounds per hour per fittings and duct. So for example, if our duct was being fabricated at 55 pounds per hour, we can come up and click on the word fab at the top of the column. If we right click it, it'll allow us to put a complete value in there. So I can type in 55 and hit OK, and it'll put it into that column. If I left click, remember that is for factoring. So right click this column, put in 55, and right click this column and put in 55. And so that'll take care of the standard length duct or the coil line duct. We've seen factors as high as 100 pounds per hour, and some even higher. So it all depends on what your pounds per hour factor is. There is no right answer for this. Now we'll go over to a rectangular fitting. The rectangular fittings we're going to adjust globally. I'm not going to go through and adjust each individual item due to the fact that it's just going to be quicker to use the global change tool and set everything to a common number. Let's go to the menu button at the top, and I'm going to hit global change, and I'm going to tell it to do the fabrication labor, and I want the number to be set to, what is the most common? 20 pounds per hour. So 20 pounds per hour for fabrication inside the shop. Do we want to include the standard length duct? No. I just finished that. We will hit the set button. It's going to ask if we're sure that we want to perform this procedure, and we'll hit yes, and it'll go through and set the fabrication factor pounds per hour for all of these items to 20. Now we can go back and do the install. Let's click on global change. We'll check the install boxes for all 3 aspect ratios. And now we're going to put in the number we wish to use. We'll use 15 for our field installation pounds per hour factor. And so as we click into the boxes, we just type in the 15. Include standard length duct? Yes, I will include it in this one because we're installing it using the same pounds per hour factor. Now we hit the set button, yes on the confirmation, and it'll go through and change them all. Most typically, everyone will take the other labor and set that to 0 because their pounds per hour includes all of the other labor factors, and they're not required with this type of a setup. So we'll hit set and yes. Okay, so we've made the change in the pressure file. This pressure file is now going to use a pounds per hour factor. The only problem is our data file is still set up on a per piece labor. Let's go ahead and exit out of this pressure file and then look at the data file. Now that we have our 2-inch pounds per hour pressure file built, we need to make changes in our data file to more closely reflect what we're going to need for this pounds per hour setup. Let's go ahead and click on the data file button. Once the data file opens up, we can now start looking at making our changes. So, what items in here are going to carry labor factors that we will need to go through and remove? Liner. Now, most companies will still do the liner on a per square foot basis, so we'll skip that page. Hangers. The hanger is most likely going to be included in that 15 pounds per hour labor factor for the hangers. So when we click hangers, we need to go to the per hanger setup page, and we can then go through and zero out the labor for all of the individual hangers. You will have to click on each individual one and zero out the labor factor. I'm just going to use the 18 gauge galvanized strap since I know that's the one set up as the default in my pressure file. I would come back and recommend adjusting all of these items, and there is no global labor removal from the data file. We do not want you to go through and do that because some of the items will be removed, some of the items won't. We want you to go item by item. Go back to hangers, and now I'm going to verify that the hanger connector that I'm using is going to have a 0 as well. So how do I figure out which hanger connector is being used as a default? Back to hangers, per hanger setup, click on the 18 gauge galvanized strap. Down at the bottom, click on show defaults. So what is the default setup for this? Tech screw. So let's go back to hangers, hanger connector, click on the tech screw, and we'll make sure that we zero out the hours to install that guy. We'll return to the menu now, and we'll continue on down the list. Turning vanes. Yes, the turning vane labor is already included in my pounds per hour factor. So I'm going to go to the 2-inch double wall and zero out my labor here and zero out my plus labor. So now I will no longer carry any separate labor factor from my turning vanes. Go to menu and move on down the list. Seams. Yes, the labor for my Pittsburgh machine is carried in my pounds per hour factor. So therefore I can zero out the labor for Pittsburgh and snap lock pipe. No longer required. You will need to make sure that you zero out the feet per hour for the large Pittsburgh as well. Now we go down to menu. Next up, joints. What rectangular joint labor needs to be carried? None, because my pounds per hour fabrication and field installation labor rate takes care of all of that labor for me. Go to the per joint setup, galvanized TDF TDC, and we'll want to zero out this labor. The particular item that I'm using though is standing S and drive, so I'm just going to go to that and zero out the labor. The quick easy way is change the very first line to a 0, click and drag from the bottom up, and using the fill down method, edit, fill down, which is a Control D shortcut key, it'll fill down that labor all the way to the bottom. And then I'm just going to copy that column of zeros and paste it into the fab labor, field labor, so that it will no longer carry any labor for the field as well. Now I'll go back to rec joints and go to the joint sealant, and I'll need to zero out the labor for the joint sealers as well. And since I know I'm using duct sealer, I'm just going to put a 0 in there. We would go to menu. I would continue on down the line zeroing out all of my component labor, except for the items I want to have added in. Reinforcements, my volume dampers, all of those things would need to be visited. For the purpose of this overview, however, I'm going to stop at this point. I'm going to go ahead and hit the exit button down at the bottom to have all of the changes saved into my data file. We will now go into takeoff and load up this pounds per hour pressure file and verify our labor. Let's go to main menu, and we'll go to the job file, and we're going to go ahead and create a new zone for pounds per hour labor. PPH labor factors. Once we click the OK button, it'll ask us to choose the pressure files we want to use, and I'm going to select the 2-inch PPH galvanized, and then go ahead and hit the OK button down at the bottom. You'll see that it changes over to the takeoff screen and loads that proper pressure file. Now that we've returned to the takeoff screen, let's test that labor. I'm going to go ahead and select a rectangular square elbow. When the elbow comes up, we can see right here in this portion of the screen, we've got our weight visible. The weight says 29.99 pounds, or 30 pounds. And our fabrication labor is 1.5 hours. Let's turn on the calculator. So we'll go to Tools, and we'll bring up the calculator. So let's take that 30 pounds and divide it by the 1.5 hours. 30 pounds divided by 1.5 hours gives us a pounds per hour factor of 20. So we're getting the exact pounds per hour fabrication labor we needed. Let's again use that 30 pounds and divide it by the 1.999 field labor. And hit OK. Exit. We can see that we're getting that 15 pounds per hour field factor that we needed. So the program is set up to automatically give us that labor. You can see through a quick little walkthrough, it took about 15 minutes for me to go through and set up a pounds per hour labor setup. This was a partial setup. I did not do the complete setup, just for illustration purposes. We do recommend that if you're going to modify your labor over to pounds per hour, please do not use this video for your only instruction. Call the 800 number, schedule a time with one of our trained technicians to walk you through all of the changes that need to be made. And you always need to come back in here into the takeoff screen, click an item, and look at the labor as it comes up and verify that it is correct using your own calculator. This will conclude the walkthrough of switching the labor over to pounds per hour.